Today's quick tip is swing through the curve, not hit through the ball. Why is hitting through the ball a bad swing cue or swing phrase for you to be thinking about? Because hitting through the ball suggests a quick striking action, usually driven by our arm and hand, coming to an abrupt stop. So what's wrong with hitting through the ball is that in the forward swing on the forehand side, it encourages us to start closing the racket face too early in the swinging process. This usually means pronating our forearm and wrist too soon out of the slot. So just so you're clear, if the racket's on edge here, pronation is this action, thumb going down, and on the backhand, it's supination. So turning your hand over to hold a bowl of soup, supination. So hitting the ball on both sides, forehand and backhand, encourages us to start pronation too early, starting the racket closer too early, and then it basically lines up the racket head with our arm too early. So instead of preserving the lag angle coming out of the slot, now we have the racket out on the swing circle lined up with our arm too soon, and that leads us to only be able to swing as fast as our arm can move around the body, which is only 20 miles an hour. In the backhand, it encourages us to supinate too soon, getting the racket lined up again with our hand, swinging slowly around the body. And then the hitting through the ball phrase then comes back to plague us as we approach contact. So if we've started swinging too early on the forehand side, pronated our forearm too early, lined up the racket with our arm too early, then as the player moves into contact, they sense they have no lag to release, no power to release through the ball. And so what do? Well, then there's a last second attempt to manipulate this racket handle through contact, either in some sort of flip, a rollover, a swat, swinging gate. There's a whole variety of variations, but basically it means we've gone all this far, and then all of a sudden we have to realize we really have to close the racket here at the end with some power. And so this forces us into the snapping, flipping action that we see so often at lower levels of play. Now this quick closure of the racket, in technical terms, is called a high rate of closure, because it's a quick, high rate of closing this racket face. Backhand, the same thing. This backhand levering action right at contact, again, that helps strain the elbow and create tennis elbow problems, but that's it for another video. It's really this high rate of closure at the end that we're trying to eliminate in good swinging. And this high rate of closure of the racket face comes to plague us in our ground strokes and in our volleys. So what you see, and I'll bet you'll see it this week from one of your pals that you're playing with or yourself, is someone will get a nice high sitting volley and the player will be 2 or 3 feet from the net. And usually one out of 2 things happen. Sometimes they make it, but most of the time they get over anxious and they want to hit at the ball, and so they close down this racket face with a high rate of closure, and the ball goes sending right into the net, seemingly impossible because the player was standing right over the net. Now, over the years, I saw Roger Federer do this many times on his forehand volleys, not on his backhand. No, he restrained that impulse, but on his forehands, he would reach and snap this racket close, creating a lot of errors. And it had a definite impact, this high rate of closure issue. If you remember, the last time he played in a Grand Slam was against Novak Djokovic in 2019 Wimbledon final. Roger outplayed Novak, but he lost 3 tie-break sets in that match. And he made 11 unforced errors, many of the ones I'm just describing now, and Novak made 0. So Novak won the match, won the championship, and, ascended further on the competitive goat chase. I also saw Taylor Fritz do this exact error just this week in the ATP finals against Jannik Sinner. At a critical moment of the match, he had a total forehand volley sitter a couple feet from the net, and he closed the racket face too fast, too much down, and netted it. Seemingly impossible, but he did it. So this can happen at all levels of tennis, even to the best players of the world. And I'll have a couple video clips in the notes where you can take a look at this for yourself. So to play better tennis, play at a higher level, we need the opposite of what we got with the hitting through the ball idea. So we want a low rate of closure of the racket face, nice steady low rate of closure, but we also want acceleration of the racket head through contact. So that's why I like the swing phrase, the swing cue of hitting through the curve, because coming from the slot, let's say on the forehand side, the target is here now, but the initial movement of the racket coming out of this rotational action that we have is the racket is swinging out to the right. And then as we get to the curve is out to the right, so we're swinging along the curve, starting from the slot. And then as we get to the turn of the swing where we're turning into contact and squaring the racket, then the racket on the forehand side for a right-hander starts to go curve left. And so we want to swing easily, freely through that curve. On the backhand, if the target is here and I'm a right-hander, then I'm orienting myself to the left. And so the racket is moving on this curve out to the left, which you'll see in a moment. And then as we get into contact area and pass through contact, the racket is curving right. And you'll see this in the video clip right after this of the big three doing exactly that. In wrapping up, I want to say this about the phrase hitting through the ball, is that it focuses too much of this aggressive activity on the ball. The ball is not the enemy in tennis. The enemy is across the net from you. So we don't have to kill the ball or murder the ball in order to play good tennis. What we need to do is send the ball with enough speed and spin across the net so our opponent, the enemy, can't return it. I like the phrase swing through the curve because it puts us in the right mental movement map that we want to in executing a high-level swing. You know, in our ground strokes, we want a coiling and wind up of the body. And in the forward swing, we want an unwinding and uncoiling of the body. And yes, there's a kinetic chain energy transfer coming from the ground up through our body. And we hear all the pros always say, power starts from the ground up, and you know, and then they leave it at that usually. But it does start from the ground up once we inject energy into the ground by dropping our energy into it. So the energy is coming up in ways, accelerating up from the ground up through our body out to the smaller, faster, lighter segments of our body, our arm and hand. But that's not the only part of the kinetic chain process. There's a second part that's never talked about, is that along with the energy passing up in accelerating waves, the energy is passing from our core out to the center of our body, out to the periphery. So the core is the stabilization muscles around the axis of our spine, out to the central parts of heavy parts of our body, our hips, chest, shoulder, and then out to the lighter parts again, the distal parts as they call them, the arms and the hands and the wrists and the fingers. So this second wave of energy is also consistent with the swing through the curve idea, because we want this unfolding rotational release of energy that starts coiled up and tight here, but then as we move into the contact, the arms extend and unfurl and swing around the body freely. So I encourage you to try to check out whether this new swing phrase, swing through the curve, helps you. And for further encouragement, I'll leave you with the image of Stan Wawrinka hitting his goat candidate backswing with the hand and the movement tracking turned on, so you can clearly see all this curving kinetic energy passing through his swing.